Hi there. Welcome to the From Lab to Launch podcast by Qualio, where we share inspiring stories from the people on the front lines of life sciences. Tune in and leave inspired to bring your life-saving products to the world. Now let's get started with Robert, Qualio founder and CEO, and our show host.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on another episode of From Lab to Launch. I think you'll find today's episode really interesting. Our guest is Meow-Ludo. He's an emerging technology evangelist and chief scientific officer at Moth Diagnostics, a company formed in response to the COVID pandemic. Meow has a background in solving problems using biotechnology and helped found the biohacker movement in Australia. This culminated in the establishment of BioFoundry, Australia's first open-access molecular biology lab, with Moth Diagnostics co-founder Adrian Pearce. Meow has also run for federal parliament with the Science Party and Flux Party, advocating for data-driven policy and technological improvements to democracy. He is perhaps most well known for one of the world's first cyborg law cases, fighting for the right to use an implanted travel card in his hand that gained worldwide attention. There are lots of takeaways from today's show, one in particular being about the importance and value of having a global mindset when starting a business. I really hope you enjoy. I want to ask about you and Moth Diagnostics. I got so many questions. Maybe if it's just okay to kind of kick off, tell us what brought you to this company.
So this is kind of like a thing that's been kicking around for a long time. So just a little bit of backstory. I'm sure we'll go through it more throughout the podcast.
Yeah.
Moth Diagnostics is a company that formed in response to the COVID pandemic. And we aim to do point of care, low technology diagnostics. All of the technology is in the wet chemistry that sits inside our test. But it's something that we've been trying to commercialize for about 6 or 7 years. So it started off, its first incarnation was a point of care STI detection test for people who wanted to see their, sexual health status.
Mm-hmm.
And it commercially just did not make sense. And this was one of the first big projects that came out of my not-for-profit BioFoundry, which was Australia's first open access molecular biolab. So we took this to a hackathon and we won all these prizes, and then we tried to commercialize it.
Mm-hmm.
And we just got told by everyone, there's not enough money in sexual health diagnostics to make it work. And there was also some legislative problems that you can't actually disclose people's status for certain conditions. So there's things like HIV or
Mm-hmm.
COVID or chlamydia that are traceable conditions, and a pathologist has to give them the results. So they're like, point of care is not going to work. So we went, okay, fuck it, we're not going to do that. When COVID came out though, the commercial makes sense. So we pulled it off the shelf, and then that was in February on Valentine's Day, and it's now towards the end of the year and we're still going. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks we've had is actually, how do we build a quality management system really quickly?
So this entire thing, just to reframe and reset, this was BioFoundry, and this is one of the ideas where you were incubating, right? And COVID happened, and that was the opportunity that was the use case you needed, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. So I was last year in 2019, I was working on a project. So I've basically always got, a startup going. I was working on a startup that was a way to solve global warming. It was the only proven way to solve global warming. And basically that made no money. And I was kind of wondering, after a year of investing in that, I got $5,000 capital, and it was going nowhere because there's no money for climate change. I was like, what am I going to do? And then all of a sudden, pandemic, used BioFoundry to do a proof of concept.
Yeah.
And then we used that to raise a little bit of capital. We tried to bootstrap it, some exemptions, which was kind of hilarious to think you could bootstrap a medical diagnostics company because of exemptions. We nearly did it. And then we ended up, we decided to raise seed round kind of money, and we just raised the second safe to get us through our TGA application, which is equivalent to FDA.
That's impressive. Just to maybe for people listening, SAFE or simple agreement for future equity is a really simple agreement that takes the place of more expensive, cumbersome investment documentation, which with speed is of the essence, right? Everything you can do to streamline that is important. You spoke about spinning up the QMS really quickly, and I want to get back to in a moment some of that acceleration you had to go through, right? Almost instantaneously from, okay, this proof of concept to now we're a company. Before that though, I mean, you just spoke about you were looking at little, like big problems to solve. How did you get into just this biospace? Like, what's the narrative? What's the
Yeah, so
story?
I often get paid to speak at universities about alternate pathways.
Yeah.
So I had a really long undergraduate degree. I took lots of time off and went and worked commercially, did independent research, and basically I was working in IT. I wasn't really enjoying myself. I was doing like help desking, app support, this type of stuff. And my whole family are programmers. My dad started programming on fucking punch cards, so it's like in my blood. And it was very unfulfilling for me. It's like I like to do as a hobby, but not as a main thing. So I I was partying a lot, and I had I guess in the West Coast of America, you'd call it maybe a Burning Man experience. And I was halfway through this experience, and I just had this awakening, and I'm like, fuck, I want to be a scientist. I don't want to work in IT. So I finished off my weekend, and I enrolled in mature age entry university the next day. And it's funny because my first ever job I wanted was just after watching Jurassic Park. I'm like, Dad, how do I go and make dinosaurs? And he's like, you have to become a genetic engineer. So I went back to my roots, and I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to become a genetic engineer. So I went back to university, enrolled in genetics. And then throughout that time, I realized that research wasn't really for me because of the way that universities are structured. And then realized that it was very difficult to get a job commercially because in Australia, biotech and genetics aren't industries that have lots of money. So I looked around at what other people were doing, and I was participating in hackathons and came from a strong background of hacking in IT. So I went, oh, fuck it, I'm going to do what these few other people around the world are doing and set up a biohack space. And then I guess that's kind of takes me through to where I am now.
You made it sound very much like that montage of didn't have a plan, decided on a path, and it just happened. But maybe walk through what were some of the obstacles like? 'Cause that's a lot of behind the scenes, I would imagine, in what you said. But just tons of respect for getting going. I mean, what were some of the big blockers or challenges you had to get through?
Yeah, so it's I think like one of the things I really like to be first. So often when I see things that people haven't done before, I rise to the challenge. There was in the very beginning there wasn't really that many people around the world to speak to. So there's this kind of broad idea. We take a maker space and we make it biotech. But no one really had a guide. There wasn't many people to speak to. It was something you had to kind of imagine on your own. So I got in contact with the people who had done it around the world and asked them for some advice. One of the things that's different about a biohack space than a normal hack space is that it's hyper localized with respect to regulation. And that's the biggest blocker. So I decided, hey, fuck, let's have a meeting with some people that are interested. Facebook hadn't been around for a crazy amount of time. I put an event up and said, let's get together with all the people who are interested. So we formed a very, very early community. And we got 50 people turn up, which was awesome. And then the second meeting we had 10 because a lot of people, it wasn't for them.
Yeah.
After we had that second meeting, we got a letter from the government saying, we're watching you.
Interesting.
Yeah. So very early on,
yeah,
we realized that this was going to be we couldn't kind of just fly by the seat of our pants. We needed to be on board with government. Very different to America. You have a country founded on libertarian values. In Australia, it's quite authoritarian. So we have some of the strictest biotech laws in the world. So we said, fuck it, let's sit down for a coffee. And we invited them to Sydney. And I went and had a coffee with them. And now I've got them on speed dial. And we've worked with them to make sure that the legal and regulatory side of what we were doing was at the heart of our company.
How did those lessons learned apply to Moth Diagnostics? Because you said it was Valentine's Day, so February 14th, 2020. Things were, I guess, there were signs, right? And how did you take that and spin up the company? And I'm assuming here, you might correct me, that Moth Diagnostics itself wasn't really a company yet. It was more a proof of concept.
Yeah, so we've only incorporated about 5 or 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And it was a non-incorporated something, an idea or a proof of concept for, 4 or 5 months before that. The thing is that the gene control laws in Australia are actually built on ISO 17025,
Huh.
I think it is, which is the microbiological lab standard.
Mm-hmm.
So to even get our space certified to meet the basic levels of biosafety,
Mm-hmm.
we had to get everyone in Australia who was a hacker who was interested in creating these spaces to go through those standard documents together and make sure that we either met, approached, or had a really good fucking reason for not
Uh-huh.
meeting every single item in the standard. So that was a collaborative effort amongst hackers. We still have that document that we refer to, which is a custom standard. And our dream as hackers in Australia is to make the regs easier to follow. So
Mm-hmm.
in different parts of the world, when I talked before about hyper-localization,
Mm-hmm.
in countries like Indonesia,
Yeah.
their main focus is making sure that their community is safe when it comes to things like drinking water. When we
Mm-hmm.
speak to hackers in Nepal, it's a combination of like making sure they have access to medications, but also enabling commercialization of good ideas. In
Mm-hmm.
Australia, it's about being able to do community science and commercialize ideas through not going to jail for breaking the regs.
Interesting
Our
slant.
goal, our goal in Australia is basically to write our own biohacker standard that could be used around the world.
And maybe I'll try not to go down that rabbit hole because I think we could spend hours kind of digging into some of that. I think it's a fascinating space. Just to pull back a bit and let's look at the last 8 months, right, since you started really working on Moth Diagnostics and moving forward with it. You
Yeah.
sound like somebody who just gets going, right? Just gets going and tries to figure it out as you go and bring in people. I think that's a good lesson learned for people about, people always wait for the right time, but sometimes you just got to get going and see how it goes, right? What were some of the lessons
Definitely.
learned in the past 8 months? Because that sounds like the first time you really started to look at what commercial operation and maybe some of the complexities, some of the detail around the regulatory challenges. I'm curious what you learned so far this year.
Yeah. So I think I'd always been interested in the medical diagnostic space, but I hadn't um, ever had a startup which went as quick and had so much interest as this one.
Mm,
Um, Previously in biotech, I'd been doing things like food and animal stuff. We'll just say broadly a whole bunch of agricultural things, but none of them have the same regulation as a
yeah.
medical device. And the thing that I learned was this was something I kind of put off, and I wish I hadn't. I learned that there's not a whole heap of innovation going on in this space.
Mm-hmm.
Like our only competitor to this service was something that had been around for like 30, 40 years and was substandard.
Still the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It had like come a long way, but it was kind of like using Google Wave or something like that, and every time I was using it,
Do
I'm
you
just like,
remember what that
well,
is?
dude, I love Google Wave, but no one uses it. And people still maintain it, which is crazy. And
I did not
it
know that.
came out of Sydney Google office. So I've got this kind of patriotic allegiance to it. Now, oh, by the way, I don't know what temperature is over there. It's like, dude, it's like 35 degrees in my car at the moment, which is like, 105, 110 degrees, something like that.
Yeah, it's
Um,
absolutely fine here. I guess I think in the Bay Area right now, looking out the window, it's probably in Celsius. I would imagine 13 to 15 degrees. What's that
Once
in
my main
Fahrenheit?
competitor,
Yeah.
the vaccine comes, I'll have
Yeah.
to fly over and come and see the office.
Hey, you're welcome over here anytime. I'll give you a tour around the city. I would love that. But I think to anchor, you said something about that's important, that the competitor was 30, 40 years old. And we come across this all the time. And the way we talk about this, I'm curious to get your thoughts, is some of the fundamental problems we have in healthcare. And if we accept the assumption that there's a wave happening right now where
Yeah,
kind of democratizing access to creating like healthcare products, right? And I think
yeah.
you said do it without finance. I think we're going to be at the point where people are going through hacker spaces and almost getting to commercialization. That's really exciting. But there's a question here which I always ask and I struggle with, which is why can't medical products move with the same velocity as a consumer product? Because oftentimes the consumer product doesn't really matter to the world, and it's a thing for a want. It's not often for a core need, but the medical products actually make a positive dent on the universe, right? If they're successful, yet we have this molasses that just holds them back. And if you look at Qualio and just like that's if we can make a difference. I'm curious how you look at that question.
I'm wading through them. I'm wading through the molasses right now.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure like we had a working product months ago, but quality, like legislatively, quality has to be at the core of your medical diagnostics company. If you are even thinking about starting a medical diagnostics company and you're listening to this podcast, like you should start with quality. And it's such a difficult thing, but like you may not know this, like your R&D has to be in your quality management system. So that means that if you go and do all this like hacking and do all this like, basically use a hacking process to get a product, you are going to double your workload. You have to go back through and then rewrite all your R&D, rewrite all your results, work out ways to show that your hacking or even like, lean processes are actually quality processes, because lean processes are quality. But unless you have documented this, it is going to be a massive pain in the ass. And we're going through that right now. And we're paying a fortune for it. We're paying quality consultants, and all these problems can be solved with money. But if you think about quality while you're doing your hacking, and you think about quality as a response to, as a process to solve your problem, you're going to make your life so much easier. And the thing is, medical devices aren't standardized around the world. We've got like the medical device single authority tick off, which is fucking cool, right? But the thing is, if you have quality at the heart of your company, your medical device company, you don't need to worry about shit. Every country, their medical device authorization program, FDA Section 80, whichever it is, TGA in Australia, all of these are based around the same standards. So by having them at the heart of your company, you don't have to worry about getting the EU tick. If it passes in one country, it should pass in another country. The thing is that doesn't lend itself well to a hacking mentality or a lean startup kind of mentality of like, okay, how do you get an MVP without getting the quality stuff done? And the way you do it is you do it during a fucking pandemic when there's exemptions everywhere and they just care that it works. And that's why our company formed and why we've been able to get traction.
I wish that was a lesson that was more repeatable across across timescales and companies. But I'm just going to anchor kind of what you said, is that this is really difficult, and there's an obvious intended side effect, which is there are things which don't exist in the world right now that could exist that would make positive impact, right? And how we solve that. So I think it's useful to hear from your eyes as somebody who's inside the tornado right now, trying to make this happen and work.
Just one thing though, going back, you said, you wish it was more repeatable. The pandemic, is increasing. The pandemics are increasing in frequency. This isn't the last pandemic we'll see in our lifetime, but there are elements that are repeatable that people listening should really have a think about, which is how do you exploit the things that the pandemic highlighted to accelerate your business. So, we are looking at one of our target markets to commercialize in is India. And this is because India has a more relaxed regulatory framework. So if it wasn't for the pandemic, I might not have looked at commercializing in India, but there are lessons to be learned that we can look around and say, okay, well, that was really cool. So where does just that? And can we do that there? So is there a country it's easier to get things manufactured? Is there a country it's easier to do clinical trials in? And these are things that if I go into another startup in medical devices, I'll definitely take advantage of those even without the pandemic. So like you can hack your way to the same benefits the pandemic gave you by being globally minded.
Just kind of applying a hacking mentality, right, to this as well. So just to repeat some of the lessons here I think are important. The quality has to be at the center of what you do, or else it creates a ton of pain later. Try and get it right if you can at the beginning. Number two, no matter what's going on in the world, you're seeing that there's always going to be stuff going on, good or bad. And that always means there are opportunities that get created, right? If you're creative, if your eyes are open to them. Is that a fair summary?
100%. And the thing is, the quality doesn't change anywhere in the world. And after running a startup I ran a startup in San Francisco once upon a time in food biotech space. And a lot of the investors and the people I was surrounded by were very, American centric. And like, I can see why that is. But also at the same time, there are huge opportunities available around the world that if you take the time to go and speak to some people outside the country, speak to some investors outside the country, find mentors that can broaden your horizon, you are going to be able to take advantage of things that will give you an edge over other startups.
I've really enjoyed this chat today. I've learned a ton. It's a super interesting story. I'm really excited that we're able to support you with Qualio, and I will be reaching out separately just to get some time to dig in there a bit more detail. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for sharing some of your journey today.
Thank you very much for your time, and please follow along with us and our journey, and looking forward to working more with Qualio going forward.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of From Lab to Launch, brought to you by Qualio. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and give the show a positive review. It really helps us out. For more information about Qualio, our guest today, or to be a guest on a future episode, please refer to the show notes. Until next time.